everybody, this is the Wikstrand. So, Terminator 2 was one of my absolute favorite movies when I saw it the first time. I thought it was so fantastic, and it remains, in my opinion, one of the greatest films of all time. But the real question was, in the years that followed the release of Terminator 2 was, of course, okay, but when is Terminator 3 gonna come out? Because that one is going to get even better. And, the years that followed, there were so many rumors about what it was going to be about, who is going to star in it, who is going to direct it, is Arnold coming back, is Hamilton coming back, is Cameron coming back? And I just kept waiting and waiting, but my hope never truly died that it was going to happen. Now, I don't know if it was, put on the shelf because of Arnold's heart surgery that he did back in '97, which he has said derailed a lot of projects that was going to come out but ultimately was cancelled, such as I Am Legend, Crusader and On Wings as Eagles. I was especially disheartened by On Wings as Eagles, which I thought was going to be a great movie. But we're getting sidetracked. Finally, it was set to be released in 2003, and when that thing was actually confirmed, the movie-going audiences went moderately interested in the whole thing. The interest surrounding the Terminator franchise kind of died down a little bit, but I tried my best to really get excited for this one. Sure, we ain't gonna have James Cameron in the director's seat, and sure, we're not gonna have Linda Hamilton, but maybe they will pull out something, great anyway. And I thought, at the time, 2003, that this was going to be the greatest movie of 2003. Spoiler, I was wrong about that, but I still sat there on opening night and thinking, I'm going to see the greatest fucking movie of the year, I thought. And then the movie came, and the movie ended, and I went there, and I left the cinema slightly disappointed. It's not a bad movie. It's actually quite decent. It only has some very, very major flaws. We're gonna try to find out what those flaws are, shall we? In hindsight, they probably shouldn't have released this movie at all. This is, one of these movies I think they just should have skipped doing altogether. But let's find out what the movie is about, shall we? This is Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. Connor, in this movie played by Nick Stahl, is sort of on the run from the authorities. He doesn't stay, in the same place for very long and lives off the grid. He is haunted by, his memories of, battling the Terminators back in Terminator 2, and, has these visions that, Judgment Day might come one day, but at least, they destroyed Skynet in the second movie, so there ain't gonna be any more Terminator that's gonna show up on his doorstep, right? Wrong, because a Terminator played by Christina Loken shows up, the TX, who starts killing people. Now, the idea of the antagonist in a Terminator movie being played by a model turned actress sounded first like a pretty dumb idea, but it was actually a pretty good casting decision in my opinion, because she had this very stoic look to her, and she played basically against our ideas of what this was going to be, because she was quite menacing despite, being just this stark-looking blonde woman. And to be fair, I think she is the third best villain in a Terminator movie they've had this far, because, look at the state of our villains from the other movies. Jesus Christ. So, of course, the T-800 played by Arnold Schwarzenegger shows up once again. He finds John Connor, and now they're on the run together with a veterinarian played by Claire Danes. So apparently have some connection to him in the future, is now on the run together. And as T-800 says at one point that you didn't stop Judgment Day, you only postponed it. So they are on the run from this menacing TX. At the same time as this is happening, the military is preparing to launch the actual Skynet, who is going to, oversee the, missiles and stuff like that. And if they do, will, Judgment Day happens? We shall see. So it is sort of a rerun of the story from Terminator 2. but it's not as good and it is not as spectacular, and it is most definitely not in the same type of atmosphere and tone, because let's just take a look at how Arnold is introduced in this movie. In Terminator 2, he walks into a rough biker bar, beats up some people, and emerges, in all his Arnold glory to Bad to the Bone. Da-na-na-na-na. The most badass thing that probably has ever been shot ever. What happens in this movie? Well, he comes into a gay bar and has a kind of weird thing with, this male stripper takes his clothes, goes out and puts on Elton John's Forgotten Glasses. One of these things are not quite as badass as the other one. And there was a lot of, tongue-in-cheek laughter and sort of winking to the audience. Hey, this is kind of silly, right? And I was very I was disheartened by the whole thing. So that thing wasn't very good. However, some of the action sequences was very spectacular, very well made, and the movie has a good pace, and the movie has a couple of really good characters, and there is moments in this movie that really feels like the good old times of Terminator 1 and 2, especially in the third act. Because the third act, and especially like the last 10 minutes of this movie, was actually quite fantastic and was almost as good as the old movies. Then there are aspects of Terminator 3 that is actually quite fantastic, especially when it comes to the scenes in the sort of Cyberdyne settings of the movie, where they're having these prototypes with rail guns that is walking around and shooting people and stuff like that. They were actually quite fantastic. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I think this movie should have taken place in Cyberdyne, and we should have seen some lab technician who kind of discovers that, hey, this Skynet thing is kind of dangerous, and it can take control over these machines, and if they do, we're screwed. Maybe they could have done something about that instead of having basically the same story as Terminator 2. Another thing that bothered me a little bit in this movie was the rating of this movie. This movie is technically speaking rated R, but it was such a light rated R, so it almost could have been a PG-13. Lots of deaths and violence is happening sort of off screen, and it doesn't have the same weight to itself. It doesn't have the same cadence to itself as Terminator 2. Again, not a bad movie, but it just didn't work as well. But at least this one had a fantastic ending, and at least, wasn't a convoluted nonsense thing that screwed up all the timelines like, the terrible Terminator movies that would come out later. So the thing is, should you see this movie or not? Depends on. Now, this is not, a movie that I would pop in and just watch, any other night. I would watch, the first one and the second one. They are absolute stone cold classics and absolutely fantastic movies. I would even argue that Terminator Salvation is a very good movie, if yet having a slightly weaker third act. But parts of that movie was absolutely fantastic, and they actually tried something new, which none of the other Terminator movies did. But if you thought after Terminator 2 that it cannot get any better from this, you would be right. And if you have never seen any other Terminator movies outside of 1 and 2, keep it that way. If you've seen every other Terminator movies except this one, well, give this one a go, because this is a quite decent, fast-paced, well-made, spectacular action movie, and, well, it could have been so much worse. Oh, there is one more thing we have to talk about, and that is a deleted scene, which I cannot really decide whether or not I'm really happy that they didn't have in the movie or really sad that they didn't have in that movie, because it sort of explained a lot, but at the same time it was very silly. So there is this boardroom meeting where they're discussing, the prototype for the T-800, they're having there, and they're having, discussions about, how it's going to look and stuff like that. And somehow they have, taken one of the, I think it was one of the scientists, and, modeled it after him, who, by the way, is played by Arnold, but having a completely different voice. And some of the guys around the table says that, yeah, I like the concept of this, but he probably should have a completely different voice. And then they're cut off to a guy sitting there, a scrawny little guy who says that we can fix that with, he is dubbed by Arnold. It's a very, very insanely silly sequence. It probably wouldn't have fit at all, but it is a funny and, you know, kind of clever little sequence. It probably would have, you know, tipped this over the edge to be completely silly and a bit too self-aware of itself. I would guess that this sequence exists on YouTube somewhere, so check it out and you know, decide for yourself whether or not you think it should have been in the movie or not. I do recommend this movie, sort of. It is a good movie, and I think it is a little overlooked, even though the promises that they were making in this movie that was going to happen later ending up, you know, didn't happen because they rebooted it, and then they rebooted it again and again, and now they're apparently going to reboot it one more time with, you know, AI and shit like that. Please let this thing die. It's a weird thing. The more bad Terminator movies that is turned out, the better this one is by comparison. And as it stands right now, right today, I actually think this movie is quite underrated. I give Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines 73 points. It isn't as dark and epic and fantastic as the other ones, but it is quite good with a kind of decent villain and a couple of great action sequences and a great ending. So it could have gone a lot worse than I think, and Jonathan Moster was clearly not the right, you know, director for this one. I don't know who should have done it except for James Cameron. They probably just should have skipped doing this at all. So I'll see you next time for, well, so-and-so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.